So we've already talked a little bit about how the database is connecting to the code. But just to kind of reiterate, in our program CS, this statement is the one that is connecting everything together. So it's kind of pulling in our context, and the context indicates that this movie class in our model is going to be used to generate our database table. This is going to be the name of our database table. Okay, so that's all in the context class. And it also then pulls in where we are going to store the database and what we are going to call it, and then what some of the database settings should be. And that's all in this app settings JSON file. Okay, so that's where our connection string is. Okay, and you can see it's got our movie context here. So that's another connection. And here is the local server. Here's the name. Okay, we're indicating it's a trusted connection and multiple active results. You guys are going to learn more about all of these little intricacies in the 218 class. For right now, if you want to change the name of the database, you can. Or if there's a problem with your database and you need to generate it again, you just put a new name in here and do an update database in the console. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that. So program CS pulls all of that together. So can we actually look at this database? Yes, we can. In order to look at the database, first I'm going to stop the running app. We need to go into the SQL Server Object Explorer, which is part of Visual Studio. So I happen to have it here, but if you don't have it here, you can go to View and then just find SQL Server Object Explorer right here and click on that. When you get in here, you'll notice that there's a couple local DBs. And so what you have to do is kind of expand these out and take a look at the databases. And here you can see, I've done this a couple times, and I've got the Razor Pages movie context. And like I said, this is hard to, this is a very long name. And, you know, I don't need to keep all of these, right? If I'm not using them, I actually can right click and delete them. Okay. And so what happens, you know, if there's a problem with your database, you can actually delete it. I can delete this thing. Come back over here and just do update database and it'll generate it again. Now it's a problem if you update database and you already have one with this name. Okay, that is a problem. Okay, so if you want to generate a new database and you haven't deleted the old one, you can just change the name to something else. Okay, but if I come back over here and I refresh this, okay, that new database is now here. Okay, and so if I look, here is my movie table, and I can see my columns. I can tell that's the primary key. It's also listed here. When I deleted the old one and I generated this, I did lose the data that I had entered. But if you right click on the table, you can actually view any data that's in it. So if you guys do this, you'll actually see the data there. You can also right click and go into Designer. So if you go into Designer, that will show you, your table up here and your SQL code down here. So this is actually kind of neat, the way that it all works. What we're going to do next is we are going to seed the database. We're going to basically create some records or rows for the database. Now, in order for this to run, the seed data, it's only going to run if your database is empty. So what I'm going to have you guys do is, for right now, you are going to make sure you come in here, delete this. Oops, probably have to close this first. Okay, once everything is closed, you should be able to delete it. And then we're going to create our seed file. Now, if for whatever reason, if it does not delete, then I'm just going to have you guys change the name. All right, so it's not liking something I've got open. Doesn't like that I'm trying to delete it. So what I'm going to do is just change the name. And I'm going to call it, I'll just call it movie database. Okay, and let me save that. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the seed the database. So we're going to do a new class in models. So we've got to go back over to the Solution Explorer and find our models. We're going to add a new class here. And we're going to call this thing seed data. And I'm going to pause while I key all of this in because there is quite a bit here. Alrighty, so here we have our seed data class. And so you can see that we are creating a context here. And so this is the code that you need to enter, basically to get started creating your seed data. So we're looking at the Razor Pages movie context. It's got service provider, get required service. These do not need to break at that point. So we're using service provider dot get required services, DB context options, and we've got our Razor Pages movie context, which is basically all of this is coming into required service as a data type. And then for DB context objects, the data type is our Razor Pages movie context, which is right here. Okay, and then basically it is saying if the context is null or our context.movie is null, which would mean that there's nothing there. So basically we don't have a database. We don't have a movie database at all. Okay, then we are throwing an error. Then what it looks for is it looks in our movie database to see if there is any data there. And if there's any data there, then it will not run our seed data. And that is why I had you guys delete this. And if you didn't delete it, you needed to go into app settings and change the name. Okay, because if there's data there, it is not going to run your seed data. Okay, so that's kind of a key point because we're going to generate this database again. Okay, so going back to our seed data. So the first two things are basically checking for error conditions, right? And then after that, it's going to add all of these, all of this data to our table. So we've got context.movie.add range. And then you can see this is a new movie, and I have just set the properties to different values that were required. And if you guys want to add more movies, that's fine. Then at the bottom, you can see it's going to save the changes. It is saving the changes to the database when this runs. Okay, so we at this point, we haven't run it, but we are going to add a command to our program CS file that will run this script. Okay, so that is what we're going to do next. So we got the script. Now we got to tell it to run it. So we're going to go into program CS. And we need to have a using statement that we do not have yet. So we are going to say using Razor Pages movie dot models. Okay, and then after app builder, we're going to say using variable scope equals app dot service services dot create scope. Then in the curlies, equals scope dot service provider. And this is where we're going to tell it to run our seed data. Initialize services. All right, so this is going to tell it to run our seed data. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to get our database context from a dependency injection. And then it's going to call the seed data initialize method, passing our database context instance, okay, which is this. And then what it's automatically going to do, because this is part of the services feature, is that once it does initializes it, then it's going to get rid of that context. Okay, so we're going to save all of this. And now we do need to run an update database. So what this is doing now is that we had a record in the old database. And by deleting it and running this again, we now have an empty database. Okay, so you either deleted the old one and ran it again to create the new one, or you change the name here, and running update database creates one with the new name, which is what I did. So if I refresh this, I will now see movie database. That's the one I just created. This is currently empty, right? But when I run my application, it is going to run all of that seed data. And now I'm going to have data. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And at this point, I have the seed data. So if I do /movies, I see all the seed data here. Now, if you don't see the seed data, it's probably because you did not get rid of the old database and create a new one. Because if there's even one record in it, it will not run your seed data. Okay, so if you want to see this in the database itself, well, let me stop this. I can go over to the SQL Server Object Explorer. Here's my movie database. Right click, and I can say view data. and there is my data. That's all of my seed data. Okay, so at this point, we are done with this phase and we are going to be moving on to our next phase, which involves updating some of our generated pages.